Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Beef Up Front podcast here on Pick Swap Media. This is your host, Ryan Coyle, joined by my man, Sean Barnard, again, as we continue our preseason coverage of college basketball. We already did our Big East and ACC preview. Today, we're diving into the Big 10, Big 12, recording on the first day that games are playing. But, Sean, as we were talking about before, this week is a bit of just like a tune-up week, kind of preseason-ish games. We have James Madison playing Valley Forge right now, and it was 74-11 at halftime. We had Baylor play Mississippi Valley State earlier. That game was by Baylor won by, I believe it was 64 points in the end. So a lot of scrimmage type games this week. So still make sure to tune in these kind of episodes, as it'll really get you geared up as next week and the week after that really kick off the season, I think. But excited for another episode. Welcome back, and how are we?
Yeah, doing well. World Series over now. Philly's officially over. We're fully kicking into hoop season, so it's good to see a big night for basketball, NBA, NCAA, everything kicking off, hitting its stride. So it's the best time of year.
Yep. All right. Well, without further ado, let's get into it. We'll be breaking down the Big 10 and Big 12 today, following kind of the same model that we did for our ACC and Big East episode. We're going to be breaking down our top teams in the conference, a sleeper team, an overrated team, as well as our conference, all-conference team and player of the year. So we'll start it off with the Big 10. Go from 3 to 1. Who do you got as your third-place team coming into the year?
Third place team in the Big Ten, I have Illinois. A lot of turnover going on there. They lost Kofi Coburn, Andre Curbelo. 10 total players moved on from the roster last year, some by graduation, some by transfer, etc. But the kind of new roster they have, they're kind of embracing this positionless, versatile style of basketball, which is something that very much intrigues me. They got a couple nice transfers coming in. Terrence Shannon Jr. out of Texas Tech, I have some high hopes for. Matthew Mayer out of Baylor. A couple good guys there. Sky Clark is kind of their X factor, a 5-star recruit. He's expected to kind of step up and be their point guard, it looks like. So I'm curious how that plays out. Coleman Hawkins also seems due for a breakout season. But I like kind of the culture they've built at Illinois. I think they've put things in, and I like kind of the way they're shifting from – obviously they built around Kofi so heavily as having like a post-dominant player in the past. I think they're going to pick up the pace this year, and I think it's going to catch some people off guard, and I think they're going to be ready to compete.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I got Illinois as my third team as well. Since Brad Underwood took over that program, they were cellar dwellers of the Big Ten. Now they're consistently one of the top teams, not just in the conference, but in the country. I mean, like you were saying with Kofi, and then the years prior with Ayo Dosunmu as well, they were really the faces of the program, and really it was kind of like a two-man show. But I think it's time for a new era of Illinois basketball to be rung in. I think this league is going to be so even. I could see 5 to 6 teams potentially being that top spot. I don't know how many of these teams are necessarily elite, if any of them will be like a Final Four team, but I think they're going to have 6 or 7 teams in the top 25 throughout the year. Like you mentioned as well, Curbelo transferred out. He was so up and down. He had so many great games and great moments, but then he shit the bed a lot of times as well. So, but Underwood did some good work in the portal. Terrence Shannon Jr., as you touched on, I think he's one of the more underrated players in the country. And he's going to bring that defensive toughness that he had with him at Texas Tech to Illinois. And then Matthew Mayer as well, a stretch big, who I think is going to have a Brady Manick type impact for Illinois this year. And Sky Clark, I'm really high on him. I think he's going to be the next great kind of Illinois guard following Ayo Dosunmu's footsteps. A little bit worried about the scoring on this team outside of those guys, though, but Underwood always finds a way, I think, to have his guys playing hard and together. They can just, with those main 3 offensive pieces, get the rest of the guys to just kind of chip in as role players and just continue to have that good offensive kind of chemistry that they've had over the past few years. I think they'll have another nice season. And kind of just going back off of what you said with Coleman Hawkins, he's the name where listening to some Big Ten previews and as well as reading up on some stuff, a lot of people are super high on him as one of the national breakout players. So 6'11" forward, I believe it's his sophomore year, should be in for a big season.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard a lot of good stuff about him too. He's not somebody that I super remember very well from last year, even though he's making his return. This Illinois team has been a team that I've enjoyed following these past couple of years, since the Ayo years, since Kobe. They seem to always kind of have guys that are just fun to watch and fun stories to embrace. Curbelo, I've been a huge fan of too. So I'm excited to see what the team fully looks like this year.
Yeah. How about your second place team?
Second place team, I'm moving on to Michigan. Went 19-5 last year, made the Sweet 16 for the 5th straight year. Hunter Dickinson's kind of the biggest storyline here. We'll get into the awards later, but I'm pretty high on him on the season he's going to have, returning for his 3rd year. They're also brought in Princeton transfer Jalen Llewellyn, I believe is how you say it, but
Mhm.
15.2 points per game score, shot 38.6% from three. This Michigan team struggled from the perimeter as far as shooting last year. I think he's going to help with that. They also brought in four-star freshmen, including Juwan Howard's son, who's expected to start. That's Jet Howard. Doug McDaniel's also a guy who's expected to have a major impact. And I really kind of look at it as Dickinson's going to be the main storyline. And if they hit one or two of these guys, they kind of just need that guard running mate to truly pair him with. And I love what Juwan Howard has done for the culture in Michigan as well. Fan of him as a coach, and I think this team's going to find a way to click when we get to the crunch time of the year.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on Michigan as well. Spoiler alert, they're my number one team, but my number two team is Indiana, who a lot of people have pegged at the top, and I believe they were pegged in the Big Ten media poll as a top team. I think it's a bit like kind of premature to crown them as champs going into the year. They haven't won the Big Ten since 2015, 2016. Might be the most talented overall team in the Big Ten, but I still want to see them find a way to piece it all together. Trace Jackson Davies, one of the best players in the country. Don't need to say much about him. Just a very, very dominant and experienced big man. He was named preseason Big Ten Player of the Year, and also have talented senior guard with Xavier Johnson returning. He averaged 12 a game last year, and then they bring in a really talented freshman guard who should be one of the top 15 to 20 freshmen probably throughout the country, and Jalen Hood-Schifino. He's a standout guard from this year's recruiting class. This team was a 12 seed last year, though. They beat Wyoming in the first four, and then they went on to play 5 seed St. Mary's and got blown out. So, like I said, a talented team coming back, an experienced bunch. But so this wasn't a team like North Carolina last year that had a lot of talent, made a deep run, and brings a lot of talent back. They were a one and done after that Wyoming game. So I kind of want to see them piece it all together before I crown them as champions, but they should be a top 10 to 15 team throughout the season this year.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that can swing me right into I have Indiana as my number one spot here. You touched on a lot of this, returning over 80% of their minutes last year. I do believe in continuity, especially when there is success like there was last year. Obviously, it didn't end the way they wanted, getting bounced by St. Mary's, only making it past the first four, but 21-14 overall. They struggled in conference play. They only went 9-11 in season last year.
Mhm.
I think that's going to improve this year, especially as these guys continue to play together. Trace Jackson Davies is the guy there, coming off a season where he averaged 18.3 points, 8.1 rebounds, 2.3 blocks, and the freshman that you touched on, Jalen Hood-Schifino, which is a sick name, and he seems like the man. So I'm excited to see like what he brings to kind of a new style to this team. And overall, I just like how they're sticking together. I think they're going to build off it. And while you never want to be losing in the tournament that quick, St. Mary's is kind of a respectable exit, in my opinion. They're a solid squad, and they didn't do as much damage as they hoped last year either. But overall, I'm okay with Indiana, and I think they're going to come in with a chip on their shoulder this year.
Yeah, going back to Jackson Davies, one of the things I touched on, he was one of my top 10 returning guys for college basketball this year. I'm interested to see if he expanded his game a little bit out to the perimeter, maybe shoot some threes this year, because if he's able to consistently knock down some outside shots, I think that's going to open up the offense even more. He hasn't made a three in his entire college career. But when you look at the Big Ten, there's so many good big men. If you're able to get them away from the hoop out on the perimeter, that's just going to open up lanes more for these guards. So if he's able to extend his range a little bit this offseason, that's why I think Indiana might have a little bit more upside than some of these teams, but it's kind of a wait and see thing with them. But my number one team, as I touched on, Michigan. I think, like I said at the beginning with Illinois, I think it's going to be a very good lead. A lot of good teams in the tournament, but I'm not really seeing a legit Final Four team out of this conference. I think they're all pretty steady, Eddie, kind of even. But Michigan being my top team, I think just because of Dickinson and his consistent ability to dominate a game from the post. And then they added the Princeton transfer, like you said, with Llewellyn, who another guy that I've heard his name pop up consistently. Because it's kind of when you make that jump athletically from the Ivy League to the Big Ten, that like wasn't his problem. He's a former top 100 recruit, and he just happened to be a very good student, and he's a Big Ten level athlete. He just chose to go to Princeton, going to another great school in Michigan for his grad year. So there should be no kind of questions about his like IQ or his athleticism fitting in to a school like Michigan. He should be able to play right away and is a really good shooter. And then like you were touching on with Jet Howard, he's one of the guys who a lot of what I've read and a lot of what I've seen as well, he's going to be one of those guys where we look at as a potential recruiting mistake with his ranking. He's in like the 50s and 60s, most of these things. And I've seen some mock drafts that have him going in the first round already. So he's a guy who should be able to step in. He should have a good opportunity to play for his dad right away. I think he has a big year, 6'8", and he plays like the guard spot, so he should be a tough matchup. And then sophomore guard Kobe Buffkin. I like him to make a jump as well. He had some pretty nice performances last year behind Eli Brooks, who was there, it seemed like, for 7 years. But Buffkin, I think it's kind of his team now at the point guard spot. So I'm pretty high on this Michigan team, but I see like a Sweet 16, maybe an Elite Eight kind of as their ceiling.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with the assessment of I don't consider any of these teams that we've gone through as legitimate NCAA title threats. I don't see any of these guys going on to a Final Four or anything like that, but it is going to be a competitive conference, and I think there isn't that much difference from top to bottom compared to some other conferences, which will make for exciting play at the minimum.
Yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised to see Illinois win the league, but I think they will also were picked to finish. I believe it was like seventh in the conference. Like it's such like parity throughout this league, which should make it really fun.
Yeah.
But going to some sleeper teams, Illinois has been mentioned as one. Who's your sleeper team coming into the year?
My sleeper team I have is Penn State. I think they're going to be a team that's starting to build a little bit of a basketball culture there. They went 7-13 in Big Ten play last year. Not great. Jalen Pickett's their money man. He's coming off a season where he averaged 13.3 points, 4.4 assists, 4.3 rebounds. Does a little bit of everything, and I expect him to take another leap. Seth Lundy and Miles Dredd also returning, and Andrew Funk, transfer from Bucknell. Shout out a local Jersey kid who went to high school down the road here. So shout out that. And Cameron Winter as well, expecting to make an impact. So it just feels like they're pretty guard heavy. So I guess I have a little bit of concern with them matching up with the Dickinsons and the big men of this, the Trace Jackson Davies, all the big guys that are going to dominate. That's probably my biggest concern with this team, but I think they're going to run and gun a little bit. They're going to play connected, and I like what they're building at Penn State.
Yeah, I like Penn State to surprise some people too. I really like Shrewsbury, the coach, and Andrew's a former AAU teammate of mine. And he killed it at Bucknell and was like
Yeah.
one of the better kind of mid-major shooters in the country. If he's able to space the floor for that Penn State team, that's going to make it even better. I think that was one of the more kind of underrated additions. He was one of the better Patriot League players these past few years. Sleeper team of mine, though, I'm going to go with Maryland. Kevin Willard being the main reason. I think he's one of the top 15 coaches in the sport, and I think he can get Maryland back to being a national kind of, I'm not going to say powerhouse, but nationally relevant, where they're top 10, top 15 consistently, competing at the top of the game. Seton Hall, everyone always says, is like just a hard place, just because it's a hard school to win at. Consistently looking back, they've never been completely dominant, but they've always had good teams. And he did a lot of his damage with not really high level recruits. Maryland is a much more attractive, like kind of bigger school that I think will bring in some better guys. So I like long term, and I think this year they could surprise. Their top two returners to their roster are Philadelphia guys and Dante Scott out of Emotep and Hakeem Hart out of Roman. Two experienced kind of wing players on this team. But they did lose their top two guards from last year to graduation, and Fats Russell and Eric Ayala. But put a lot of work in the transfer portal and compiled a nice kind of group of veterans for this team. Jameer Young, a Charlotte transfer at the guard spot, could find himself on an all-league team if he's able to make that transition. He averaged close to 19 points a game for Charlotte last season. And under Willard at Seton Hall, it was just a team that always played hard, defended, and they would find ways to like pull off some big upsets when they were not the most talented team. I think, like we said, there's no clear-cut like superstar championship level team in this conference, so that kind of gives you more room to pull off some upsets and maybe sneak into the tournament. I like them to make it this year, maybe be one of those teams in like the first four, kind of like in the realm of what Indiana did last year, and then maybe this year or the following season kind of take off. But Maryland's a team I think people should keep an eye out for. That would be kind of cool to see Maryland and Penn State kind of go from the bottom to potentially making the tournament this year.
Yeah, totally agree. And I like you said, there were several options for kind of the sleeper pick here, which has not been the case kind of going through some of these. So I do think it's gonna be competitive. It's gonna be cool, and I think both these teams have a chance to make some noise.
And then on the other side, how about a team maybe that's a little more overrated? It was really hard for me to pick one for this, but you had to pick. If you had to pick one, who would it be?
Yeah, I'm going with Iowa here. I think Iowa's ready to take a step back. Obviously lost Keegan Murray last year. They kind of replaced the Luka Garza gap very quickly with Keegan Murray stepping up, changing the style of play of it a little bit. His twin brother is still there in Chris Murray, but he's just not quite Keegan. And as a sophomore, Chris averaged 9.7 points, 4.3 rebounds, and 17.9 minutes per game. The expectation is for him to take that step and kind of fill that gap. And I just don't know if I quite see it with his game as much as I did with Keegan, who's doing his thing with the Kings now and looks pretty good at the NBA level. They're also relying on Tony Perkins. 7.4 point per game score and 1.6 assists last year. He's expected to kind of run the offense, and he's also a guy that I just don't have full faith in as a team. Patrick McCaffrey also important. I think Iowa's got a little bit of this is a little bit of a reputation. They believe they're going to be very good, but I'm not sure if I'm just fully bought in on the talent level.
Yeah, I'll get into my thoughts on Chris Murray in a little bit. But I was one of those teams that consistently underperforms come tournament time. Last year, as a 5 seed, people were kind of picking them to go win the national title because going into the tournament, they were one of the hottest teams in the country, and then they fell to Richmond. There's a team that they're kind of a weird fit in the Big Ten, as they're a team that doesn't play much defense and really relies on like shooting and stuff. I feel like they would be more of a ACC type school, but I agree with you. I think that they're in position to potentially take a step back. They lost a lot of production from last year. My overrated team, like I said, I don't really think there kind of is one throughout the conference this year, but if I had to pick one, I'm going to go with Purdue. Kind of pains me to say that, as I think Matt Painter is such a good coach. He always just finds ways to win. But I think they're going to be more of like a 7 to 9 type seed this year instead of that like 2 to 5 range that we usually see them in. Lose by far their best player in Jaden Ivey. Also lose Travion Williams. I know Zach Edey returns, and definitely expect a big jump in production from him, as he's going to be the sole big man on that team now. But I'm worried about the guard play on this team. They were so reliant on Ivey to make plays, and we saw last year when he struggled to hit consistent shots from the outside, so did the team. And they're another team like with Iowa. They also seem to underperform in the tournament every year. Last year had a clear path to the Final Four, had to get through St. Peter's, and they could not do that. But Matt Painter, still, like I said, such a good coach. He's going to have them back in the tournament, but I think a little lower seeded than we normally see.
Yeah, don't disrespect the Peacocks, man. But yeah, I kind of have a similar feeling about Purdue, and Zach Edey, who I do like a lot. I think is just gonna be asked too much of him this year. I think there's too much of a lack in guard play, and like it feels like Purdue hasn't had full confidence to hand him the keys yet. Like especially the way they rotated with having guys in. And like I just like there's things you can do schematically of a player the way he plays who's not that mobile. He's obviously 7'4" and huge, but like I think about them matching up with a team like Illinois, who's kind of trending toward the positionless style of basketball, and the way the modern just style of basketball has become. That I don't really know how much that Purdue is going to hold up this year was my concern there.
Yeah, the one thing I think they have kind of going for them with that is when you look at the Big Ten, most of the teams, they're like best players, they're big men. So like matchup wise, they should be all right. But still, like you said, it's going to be kind of an experiment, I think you could say, because he's a guy who was playing 20 minutes a game. Now he's probably going to be counted on to play 32, 33. That could be a big jump in production, or that could expose more of his flaws, kind of like we've seen from big men throughout the past. So definitely a conference that's going to be interesting to track all year. How about your all-conference team as well as your player of the year for the Big Ten before we move over to the Big 12?
Yeah, sure. So my all-conference team, I'll start out with, I got Trace Jackson Davies. Zach Edey, I am putting in the all-conference. I don't think he's going to be like the man. I think he is going to be exposed to an extent, but I still think the production is going to be enough to give him a
his
lot.
Numbers are still going to be huge no matter what.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I got him on here. Hunter Dickinson as well, who's my pick for player of the year. And then Terrence Shannon Jr. and Paul Mulcahy from Rutgers I have. He was second in the Big Ten in assists last year. 6'6", a big guard, a guy that I think is going to be like the full-out engine of that team. And I don't think Rutgers is going to make too much noise this year, but I think his numbers are going to be off the charts, and I like the way he plays.
Yeah, it's kind of I got 3 of the same guys as you with Jackson Davies, Hunter Dickinson, Zach Edey. It's kind of funny seeing 3, 6, 10 guys across the lineup that none are perimeter threats at all. Dickinson a little bit, but I got those guys on there, and then I got guard out of Wisconsin, Chucky Hepburn. I think he's in for a big leap this season with Johnny Davis and Brad Davidson, another guy who was in college for 8 years. He probably has 4 different degrees by now, but with him finally out, Hepburn's going to kind of have the keys to the offense. I think has a big year. And then I'm going to go with my last guy and my player of the year. I'm going to go with Chris Murray out of Iowa. I don't think he's as good as Keegan, like you said, but still, I feel like they're kind of just try to run the offense through him again, just like they did with his brother last year. There's so much potential there, I think, to kind of take another leap, as well as just continue to shoot the ball from the outside. This is a team that's just going to want to get up and down the floor and shoot threes. And if he's able to shoot, I believe he shot 37 or 38% last year. If he's able to do that with extended touches, again, he's going to put up numbers. I don't know how necessarily good the team is going to be, but I do see a path where he's shooting around 40% from three, averaging about 20 points per game. And then if Jackson Davies, Hunter Dickinson, and Zach Edey are all kind of like even, I feel like Murray might have the chance to get the nod there.
Yeah, I didn't know they were twins until today, by the way. I had no idea of that. So crazy there. But yeah, I think Keegan by far got the more basketball talent out of the two.
Uh-huh. All right. Well, that's the Big Ten. Like we've kind of mentioned throughout, maybe not a national title contender. We go to the Big 12 now, where I could see a few of these teams potentially winning the national title. So we'll start back at the top with our top three teams. Who do you got finishing third this year?
Third, I have Kansas, and they're coming off. They lost a lot of talent. We're talking about Remy Martin, Christian Brown, David McCormick, Ochai Agbaji. Two of those guys making the NBA list. Actually, I believe Remy Martin's sticking on one of the G League teams at the minimum. So kind of three there. They added Kevin McCullough, transfer from Texas Tech. Dewan Harris and Jalen Wilson are also expected to play some notable roles this year. They got 3 top 30 recruits in the freshman class, which is intriguing, but just a lot of turnover with this Kansas team that makes me a little nervous. Bill Self's obviously the guy there. He's been doing it for a long time, and that kind of is enough to keep them in this top 3 for me, but I did seriously debate dropping them below this.
Yeah, Kansas is a team that I've seen kind of up and down some rankings. They're in my top three. I'll get to them in a little bit. My third ranked team is going to be TCU. They come into the year ranked 14th in the country in the AP poll, and they're my kind of dark horse team to win the national title. They're currently at plus 5,500 on FanDuel. So if you want to sprinkle on a team with kind of some crazy odds to win it, make it the Horned Frogs. This is year 7 under Jamie Dixon. I think it's a program that's ready to take off. One pretty big looming thing is most likely their second best player, Damian Ball, is appealing a suspension right now due to he was a non-certified agent during last year's draft process. Obviously, that's something that's going to loom large with them. But if he is, I think, going to play this year, maybe might be suspended some games. But I think he should be back. And if he is, his team is very dangerous. Returns another team that returns a bulk of their production in the same realm as kind of Indiana, as well as North Carolina from a team that beat Seton Hall convincingly in the first round of the tournament, and then they nearly knocked off number 1 seed Arizona in the round of 32. A few different whistles go their way if they win that basketball game, and potentially have a path there to the Final Four. Jamie-led Dixon teams are always going to be tough and defend. Mike Miles Jr., a Player of the Year candidate in the Big 12. Eddie Lampkin, a really fun kind of throwback style big man who plays really hard in the middle there for them. This team is a team that I think has great chemistry and plays hard for each other, and I just love them coming into the year. So plus 5,500. My college football team that I told you to sprinkle on was Tennessee. They're not dead yet, but still they have a legit shot still. So I'm going to kind of hitch my wagon to TCU this year with my kind of underdog national title contender.
Yeah, it's tough not to like Lampkin either. He was one of the darlings of the tournament last year, just getting fired up the way he played. So I can get behind that a little bit. I don't have TCU in my top 3. To move to my number 2, I have Texas. They landed arguably the best transfer in the portal, and that's of course Tyrese Hunter from Iowa State. They're returning 3 starters as well as 2 5-star freshmen. Dylan Mitchell is a guy I especially think is going to make an impact. They had some growing pains in their first year with Chris Beard as their head coach. But I think with a full new season, they're kind of going to have a clearer identity, have a better idea where to play. Tyrese Hunter, I think, is the biggest notable addition. I think he's going to play a super key role in what they're building, just control things, being smart, being more composed. And I think this Texas team has kind of the pieces to kind of string it together way more this year.
Yeah, Texas was a team I think I might have been a year ahead on last year. I was super high on them coming into last year, and I put them in my Final Four at the beginning of the year, and they just never seemed to be able to fully get clicking. Like they would win 3 in a row, then they would drop 1 or 2 in a row. I really like them this year, but I think the Big 12 is going to be super good. They didn't make my top 3. Kansas comes in as my number 2. Lost Christian Braun, McCormick, Agbaji, and Remy Martin. But still they're getting pegged as a top 10 team in the nation. And I think you have to kind of continue to do that until Bill Self's no longer the coach there. Coming off a second national title, has a team that has a chance to compete for a Final Four again. Jalen Wilson and Dewan Harris are the top 2 returners for this team. Both should have chances to be on all Big 12 rosters by the end of the year. And they had a big transfer in Kevin McCullough from conference rival Texas Tech, which is a kind of a weird thing. Like Tyrese Hunter going from Iowa State to Texas, McCullers from Texas Tech to Kansas. I feel like that's with all these transfers. I feel like the one rule maybe that they should still have applied is like if you're going to transfer within the conference, you have to sit out a year. Like I feel like it's just it just feels like ethically not right.
Yeah.
It's just kind of weird. But McCullers brings very, very good defense, and he's going to be like one of the elite defenders in the country again this year. And that whole Texas Tech defensive mindset, I kind of feel like he'll be able to usher that on to some of his teammates. And they got two really nice recruits coming in: Ernest Uday Jr., very highly recruited big man, as well as Grady Dick, who I touched on, who's a very high level shooter. To be decided what else kind of he'll bring, but a guy who could potentially come in and shoot 40% when you have a knockdown, kind of facilitating point guard like DeJuan Harris. That's going to be a great addition for them on the perimeter. And another under the radar guy that I like in terms of a potential breakout year, Joseph Yesufu, transferred in last year from Drake. Kind of had a backseat role, I think, with a lot of these guys graduating, him having another year in the system. He's in for a breakout season. He was very, very good at Drake. Had some really nice plays when they made the tournament 2 years ago. So watch out for him. But I got Kansas in at 2, and I'm pretty sure I know who you got coming in at number 1.
Yeah, number one, I feel the most confident, and that is, of course, the Baylor Bears. Baylor, I think, I do consider legitimate title threats this year. We've seen them in kind of that stage before, and I just feel confident in this team. They lost Matthew Mayer, Jeremy Sohan, Kendall Brown, and James Akijo. But bringing on Keontae George, I think, is the real deal. Adam Flagler returning, LJ Cryer coming back, Flo Thamba returning. Awesome name, and a guy that's going to control the paint, be a down low presence. Langston Lowe, a top 30 recruit they brought in, also transferred in Jalen Bridges and Caleb Lomer, I believe is how you say it, Loam. But anyway, this is just the same kind of Baylor. They have the identity. They're bringing back some key pieces. We've seen them on the big stage and producing before. And Scott Drew, head coach, I just believe in this team, believe in the identity they're building. And I think, to me, they're the clear-cut top team in this conference.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I really like Baylor this year. Wouldn't be surprised to see them cut down the nets when it's all said and done. As we touched on at the beginning of the episode, watch them play Mississippi Valley State, who respectfully was like the third lowest ranked team, I believe, in Ken Palm. So it was a very kind of warm up, tune up type game, but still, you could see that they just have some dudes on that team. I really like the transfer they brought in. I was watching them on my lunch break today. Loner out of BYU. He's got some nice size and an athleticism and some bounce to him. I feel like he adds a different kind of dimension than some of these other bigs that they might have had in past years. But the combination of returning talent and welcoming some high-level freshmen like George, who is my number one freshman coming into the year, that's why I have them as my number one team in the Big 12. There's such good guard play, and watching them today, they just have so many guys who can knock down outside shots. Scott Drew, another fantastic coach. This is a league of great coaches. He's great at both X's and O's and in terms of, I feel like, motivating his guys. They were down 16 points in the national title game last year to North Carolina, and he was able to get his guys to come back and win that game. Nice depth in the front court, as I just touched on, with some good guys in the starting lineup and some guys coming off the bench. And then Jonathan Chamu Chachua, another really good name. He had a bad knee injury last year, to be decided if he's going to be able to come back this year. But if he does, that's another, 7-foot big man that you can throw out there. Not many more teams that have as good as front court depth as Baylor. So they have a legit shot, I think, to win their second national title in the past 3 years.
Yeah, totally agree. I don't think there can be too much said about this Baylor team. They just kind of seem to have it all. And I was surprised about the Matthew Mayer transfer. That's kind of a big hit. I like the way he played, and he seemed like a clear-cut kind of Baylor guy, but they just find guys to kind of replace him. And I think Keontae George is going to play a major role, the freshman coming in. I think he's the real deal, and that's going to be a key part of their team, and they just seem to have it.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about your sleeper team for the conference this year?
Sleeper team, I'm going with is Oklahoma, a team who last season didn't seem to be doubted on kind of the talent, but just the execution was kind of the problem. They were second to last in the Big 12 on turnovers, about 15 per game. They just needed all to click. They brought in a nice transfer from Nevada, and that's Grant Sherfield. He's going to make a major impact. He averaged 19.1 points and 6.4 assists last year. I think bringing that into the core that they kind of already have is a big deal. Another season where they can kind of let that talent grow, let it marinate, and I believe in them a little bit.
Yeah, this is another one where sleeper team. It's kind of hard. Like I feel like the Big East, there was a clear more bottom part of the league. ACC. When we look at the SEC as well, the Big 12 is another one where I kind of struggled, I guess, to find maybe a sleeper team and an overrated team. But I'm going to go with Kansas State. They were picked to finish last, 10th place in the Big 12 preseason poll. This conference is just so good, top to bottom. Like I wouldn't be surprised to see if Kansas State find their way into the dance as a bubble team or finish dead last. Like it's very very hard to get a read on, but that's why we do these things, kind of speculate. Jerome Tang, though, first year head coach, remade this roster throughout the transfer portal, and they should be a pretty competitive bunch. I'm not expecting them to make the tournament, but be respectable. And I feel like a lot of people are writing them off. They give me kind of Iowa State vibes from last year, who was picked to finish dead last in the conference, and they wound up making the tournament. I believe winning 2 games in the tournament. Keontae Johnson hasn't played in a few years due to a heart issue that he suffered at Florida, but he was a projected NBA player and the SEC preseason player the year before. So if he can return to even like 80% of that, that's a very good addition. And this roster is just loaded with Power 5 transfers that I think kind of getting out of a spot that you necessarily might not have had success in or wanted in and go into a team with other guys who are out having something to prove. I feel like that's a good kind of motivating factor, and especially in year one under a new coach. Everyone's going to have their chance to play and earn some minutes. And they also added a few high-level JUCO guys. So a nice combination of talent. It's going to be remain to be seen, I guess, how well they come together and how good Tang is as the head man. But might take some time to mesh together, but when it's all said and done, I think they're going to open up some eyes in the Big 12 and not finish in last place in the conference. So Kansas State's going to be my sleeper team for this year.
Yeah, and another team that just kind of have gone somewhat all in on the transfer portal and really capitalizing on that. And I know we kind of touched on this on that first episode, but it is kind of crazy how transfers are like essentially the free agents of college at this point. Like teams, you really see the ones that take advantage of that and the ones that kind of aren't as plugged in. And that's going to become a bigger and bigger deal as I think college basketball continues through the years.
Yeah, especially when you see teams move on from their head coaches, like
Yeah.
my team I talked about with Maryland. You can, I mean, more times than not, these kids are going to leave and go to a new school because it's not going to be the coach that recruited them. They're going to want to go to different opportunities. You can, like Kansas State did, basically remade the entire roster with transfers. So it's just kind of going to kind of go back to how well they all mesh and find a way to play together. But how about an overrated team for the conference? This was I think harder for me to find than the Big Ten.
Yeah, I'm going with Texas Tech here. I just think it's a little bit of a reputation kind of that's holding them up a little bit in the standings. Lost their 3 top scorers last year. They brought in 5 notable transfers, so it's not like they have nothing. The thing that I think is interesting, and this I could see going either way. This either works like swimmingly or not. But they hired Steve Green to the coaching staff, and his role is essentially as like an offensive coordinator, which is really just not something we see in basketball. So I'm kind of curious to see how that shakes out. We've seen Texas Tech kind of have the defensive oriented style of play in the past. Be physical, play hard defense, get out in transition. So I'm curious what kind of difference that makes. But I just losing your top 3 scorers, I don't necessarily believe. I think there's a step back in talent overall based on last year, and I think they're going to take just somewhat of a step back this year for sure.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. I feel like every team we've talked about, we go, yeah, they lost their 2 top guys to the transfer
Yeah.
portal or to the NBA, but they added 5 high-level players to
Yeah.
it. It's just kind of weird. And then that offensive coordinator comment, I didn't even know that. I know Mark Adams, their defensive coach, was like the defensive planner, but I don't think he had a term under Chris Beard. So that'll be interesting to kind of see like what that delegation looks like. But Texas Tech's my overrated team as well. I think Kansas, Baylor are the top 2, and then TCU, Texas are kind of that next tier. And then after that, a lot of unknown. I see them picked to finish 5th in most projections, whether it was the Big 12 poll or magazines or different podcasts. I think they'll be solid, contend for a tournament spot again, but they don't have much scoring, and that worries me, especially when you lose guys like Terrence Shannon Jr., McCullers. That worries me in a conference that has a lot of elite defenses. When you look at Baylor, Oklahoma State always plays good, hard defense. Kansas plays good defense. Texas. When you don't have guys that are able to put the ball in the cup against some of these high-level defenses, I think you're going to struggle. So I think Texas Tech kind of takes a step back this year.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And we're kind of on the same page with this one. So I do think there's more of a separation in the Big 12, definitely than the Big 10 that we talked about, and kind of a lot of the conferences when you look around. So I do think there's that consensus. Like you said, top 4. I have TCU as my 4. You have them as 3. But I think those 4 teams are kind of pretty clearly head and shoulders above the rest of the conference. But we'll see. We could be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about all conference players and then as well as your player of the year?
Yeah, so my all-conference team, I'll start out with, I got Keontae George and Adam Flagler, so 2 Baylor guards both in there. Jalen Wilson out of Kansas, I think, makes it. Mike Miles out of TCU, and I have him as my player of the year for the conference. Averaged 15.4 points, 3.8 assists, 3.5 rebounds, and 1.2 steals last year. Just a little bit of do-it-all guy. I think that's going to help run the show a ton. And lastly, I have Timmy Allen out of Texas getting on there.
We have the exact same five. I got
Wow.
George, Miles, Flagler, Timmy Allen, and Jalen Wilson. But my player of the year, I'm going with Keontae George, the freshman. That would be a kind of a big step up, but he's already in that starting five. He's the most talented guy on that team, one of the more highly touted recruits Scott Drew has ever brought in. I believe on the thing I heard, he was the second highest recruited player. The other guy was back in like 2009 or something. So this is a guy who, with Keontae George, able to really score the basketball. And watching him today, he can create as well. Like we talked about, not playing the greatest opponent, but it's just one of those things where you can see he has it. I think he's just going to get better as the season goes on as well. So pretty weird. We both got George, Miles, Flagler, Timmy Allen, and Jalen Wilson. But Big 12 should be a really good conference yet again this year.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, that is funny we ended up in the same one, but a lot of talent in the conference overall and some good top end guys too. I think a decent portion of guys will be at least borderline NBA prospects or be looked at in the draft this year. So Baylor specifically will be fun to watch. And as a conference, I'm excited about the Big 12 this year.
All right, well, that'll do it for our Big 10, Big 12 episode. We still got to hit the SEC and Pac-12 before we really get into the swing of things with these games starting to cook up against some good opponents. But any last second comments?
Yeah, no, I think I'm all good. It's good to have college basketball back. Good for hoop season to finally be here in full swing. So it feels good.
All right, we will talk soon.